For this lesson, we will be experimenting with different types of brush strokes as we study Monet's work. So we will need the usual painting supplies. We're going to have white paper, and we're going to divide it using just pencil lines into one half, and then the upper half will be into 4 equally divided rectangles. You also need to have images of Monet's work, so I have a set of postcards here that I've laminated, and laminating them just means that I can easily wipe them off when the students get paint or water on them, and then I can use them again next cycle too. We're going to be playing around with different types of techniques up here as the students kind of experiment with how to manipulate the paint, and then we'll do a larger painting down here at the bottom. You can have 4 to 6 images per class because students could look at one image as a pair, so you could have just 4 for your 8 students or more if you have more. And so to begin, you want to have students look at an image individually or with their partner and begin to study the different techniques and brush strokes they see. You can see that maybe, for example, the sky is more soft and blended, whereas the grass, you can see more individual colors and brush strokes. So have them choose one area of the painting, and they're going to try and replicate how he did that technique onto the first square of their paper. So, for example, I will look at the sky and I can see that it's light blues and things like that. So I'm going to take some paint. I'm just going to go right here in this section and see if I can just play around till I get kind of like a sky, smooth looking thing happening. And of course, you want to have the students continue to study what they see in Monet's work as they play around and experiment with what to do. And then once they're done with that, and it's not going to fill up the whole space, it's okay just to kind of do it in the middle and leave some white around it. Then they can pass on the image to the next student or group of students. And then the next one, they'll do the same thing. They will look at it and pick a piece of that painting to try and replicate and study in the next box of their image. So on this one, I think I'll use a small brush, and I'm going to kind of play around with layering all these different colors like on the rock. Some students might work more quickly, some might work more slowly. So maybe they'll fill up a whole square, maybe they'll only really practice one technique, but the other students are much, much quicker and might fill up 3 or 4 boxes. Just kind of allow them to work at their own pace, because really as long as they're putting brush to paper, they're going to be trying out different things and they're going to be working with the concepts here. So on this one, I'm leaving the individual brush strokes being seen and kind of layering this modeled look, so which is very different than what I did in this one. And so you can go through and have students practice different things there, and then they will move on to doing a more complete image in this bottom section. One option for doing that is to allow the students to take one of the images that you've brought to class, and they can then, at their own pace, try and replicate that image in that bottom section. So for your older classes, this could be an easy way for them to kind of then take what they've learned and continue experimenting with that final piece at their own pace with their own image. If you have younger classes and you wanted to lead them along so that they're following you step by step with what to do, then I've chosen to do one of Monet's water lily paintings. It's just a few colors. It's really big areas of shapes, and so that we can then show the students how to replicate something similar to this on the bottom of the paper. So I'm going to go through that right now if you chose to do that with your class. We're going to start by making the watercolor, the color of the water. And you can see that it covers up the majority of the area back here, and it's kind of a medium blue tone. So I'm going to start by taking a lot of my white and a little bit of my blue and mixing my own medium blue color. If I started with this dark blue, then those darker water lilies would not really show up. So I need to lighten it up so that we have some contrast between the water and the water lilies. So now that I have that, I'm going to use a nice big brush, and I'm going to begin to paint my blue color on here. But of course, as we look at Monet's water, we can see lots of different tones happening. So this medium blue is kind of like my base color, but I can go through and I can mix a little bit of a darker blue. And now I get some really interesting tones and textures happening. I can also play around with what happens when I kind of swirl my brush around. That looks much more like what Monet did in his water. His was not really lines, but I see kind of like curvy textures going on. So I have the students begin to fill in that whole area with blue, playing around with different colors of blue and different ways of using their brush to get texture on the back of this paper. I also like to take my paint right from my palette and just kind of mix it in to make a new color. So I took just white by itself and added it, and I mixed in that white to create another light blue tone here. If you have different sizes of brushes, it is great to bring all of them for this because these large areas go very quickly with a large brush, but we're going to be doing details in a minute where we will need some smaller brushes to get some of those on the paper. So now we have this really cool, beautiful water texture happening, different tones, lights, darks. And we're painting it very quickly, just like Monet would paint outside very quickly to capture the impression of the landscape. So we have our basic color down, and this is what's furthest away. Now we get to layer up on top of that with other things in the painting. So we can see that there are the water lilies, but they're not evenly dispersed throughout the whole thing. They kind of come in one large chunk here and another large chunk here with a lot of water showing in between. So we're going to be copying that same idea where we have these focal points happening in the painting. I'm going to be mixing some of my green with some of my white. We're going to start with a light to medium green for the water lilies, and then we're going to build up some darker tones on top of that as well. So students can again kind of experiment with how to do some water lily shapes. They're not circles, they're more of an oval. So you kind of can pull across in oval shapes, or you can just do brush strokes like this. How can we get these different sizes of water lilies in a section coming across? So have the students think about how to do that. Make some water lilies bigger than the others for some variety of size. We don't want everything to look exactly the same. It's definitely not how it is in nature. And then we'll do a second section of water lilies down here in the bottom. And we know that from perspective, things that are closest to us are bigger. So I'm going to have these water lilies be even bigger than the water lilies I just did. So now all of a sudden we begin to see our structure of the painting come in, where we have these floating there. We've used different brush strokes for the water lilies than we did for the water. And now we get to layer on some darker tones. So to make things more realistic, we're going to add some shadows, and we can see that there's darker greens around the lily pads throughout the whole sections here. We're going to be dabbing in some darker green for that. For this, you don't even need to put black on the students' palettes. For shadows, we can use dark blue or dark green, and that's going to be a really lovely shadow color. So again, we're kind of just playing around and dabbing around each water lily, kind of thinking about what texture and interest can we create using our brush to dab and smush around on those. Not really a wrong way to do it. Each one is so unique that you don't have to try and replicate the same thing on each lily pad. It's going to look very different from its neighbor, and that's a good thing. All right, now we have some great dimension happening with some shadows going on there. I think I'm going to have more darkness up here. It all feels kind of the same, so I think I'm going to add some more shadow so that we have some more interest happening, so that it's not so similar to the bottom section. All right, I like that a little bit better. So now we have the next layer built up, which is the lily pads. And then our last layer is going to be those beautiful flowers on top of them. And we can see that they're kind of dotted throughout the whole thing, not in any particular order. And the ones up close are bigger because they're closer to us. So we're going to do that same thing. I'm going to be using my small brush to do that. And I'm going to begin with just white. And I'm going to decide where I want my flowers. I think I will do about 4 to 5 in this top section. And I simply will decide where I'd like my eye to go. So I want to space them out and kind of have my eye travel from space to space, kind of like what we will be doing in Van Gogh's, where it creates some movement because these things are being repeated in this kind of like pathway of the eye. I'm also going to do maybe 5, 6 down at the bottom. I'm going to do some bigger and some smaller, just like we would find in nature. And again, creating this pathway of the eye to kind of follow those flower shapes and even kind of go off the paper so my eye travels just like that. We're going to add some color now with some red. You can use red or pink. And I'm simply going to go ahead and put some on my brush and then dab around kind of in some dot-like things kind of on top of my white, just like that. Putting too much red will cover up that white completely, and we don't want to do that. We want to have different tones happening, making it look really, really interesting and almost like you can see those petals overlapping. So I want to make sure I'm not mixing the two together, but more dabbing on top of what I've already done. Finish up these at the bottom. It's really important to have these be bigger. It draws the eye there and as well as makes it look more realistic. A little one right there. So now we have finished our water lily painting. We've experimented with different brush strokes and textures at the top and then kind of brought it all together into this bottom painting, and you're done.